welcome Erica Telly.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I want to get right in on siblings are on my mind. I've wanted to travel again with my brother for many years, and you and your sister, very different professional backgrounds, different travel interests, have a travel routine that I think the whole group should hear about.
So I'm an avid collector of points and miles. And so every other year, my sister and I go on what we call our sister trip. She's a school teacher in Arizona, and never really thought that she'd be able to travel internationally. And because we're using points and miles, and I'm not like paying for it with real money, I guess, it's she's totally okay with it. And then, I really like my sister, and she's a great travel partner, so it all works out.
The miles and points are often a challenge for family. I mean, there's usually one, so we'll use you as the example as the person in the family who gets very excited about it, and you can either try to proselytize and convert family members, or you can open accounts with their permission and manage things for them, or keep it totally separate. So my brother and I, he's a scientist. He loves his stuff. He has no interest in the points, and I think the most I've ever done is sent him a United Club pass when I knew he had a long connection going to a conference, and that's perfectly fine for us. So talk about how you manage what the involvement is in points with your sister or anybody broadly in your family.
Well, I'm the only one that cares is the simple answer. If anyone's ever interested in my family, I'm happy to answer their questions. I know one of my cousins, when she was out of college and wanted to get her first credit card, we went through her options as an example. It should always be fun and relaxing. And if you don't have an interest in it and you're not kind of geeky about it, either, have one card that's good enough and just use that to buy stuff, or, I guess just don't force it on people.
I think that's a great point. I mean, and it's something that for those of us that are really into points, it can seem like it's easy and fun, and forget about how stressful money matters are. And these are money matters. These are things where, if you forget to pay that bill, or you miss this deadline for a sign up bonus, you drop this gift card or forget about it. It's one little mistake can cost a heck of a lot more than quite a bit of time of effort.
Yeah, and honestly, if a true points and miles expert looked at my portfolio, they'd probably be able to point out a bunch of places I could, squeak out more points. But it's good enough for me to where I don't stress about it, and I'm able to do things like take my family on free trips, and that's good enough for me.
And so you mentioned a good enough card. What is a good enough? What we often call an everyday card.
Well, when my friends come to me and say, how do I get started with points and miles? If they're willing to do it, I would say, look at your last year's spending and find out what are your 2 or 3 highest categories. Like, do you spend the most money on groceries or gas or restaurants and eating out? Because it's very personal to your lifestyle. And then just find a card that gives you more than 1 point per dollar for those categories if possible. And then also don't overlook cashback cards. If you're not interested in figuring out how to cash in a bunch of points for an airline ticket when there's, a lot of tricks to that in itself, cashback cards are totally fine. And there's a lot that give you more than 1% back.
Yeah, and certainly now you've got several 2% cards, the Citi Double Cash, the Fidelity Visa, that are both 2% and no annual fee. And I think for a number of years, Capital One was popular with a lot of customers with 2% cards, but they were also having an annual fee, and that's certainly not necessary now. And 2% everywhere is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, put the 2% towards your travel and make it, if that's more relaxing for you.
So I'm not analytical by nature, and I'm deliberately very not analytical about my points stuff. I will spend a lot of money on Delta cards compared to cards that might earn more valuable points just for my status. And a lot of these things I do because I feel like if I get the end result of many of the analytical travelers is to get the Bank of America Preferred Rewards cashback card tied to investment accounts and get nearly 3% cash back and over 3% redeeming for travel. That's like the rational result. But then I feel like I wouldn't be having any fun. So
Exactly. If
are you
fun,
at that
why you
point?
do it?
How do you balance fun versus your rational analytical side and points?
I just have a spreadsheet and I plug stuff in it and it spits out whether or not it's a good deal in terms of ROI. And then, crap, I forgot the next thing I was going to say. Sorry. Yeah, so I just look at the math basically.
Yeah, I mean, about your, how are you doing that math? I mean, I guess it is mystifying to me when I see people on their sites like Milenomics that they really get into the numbers and my eyes just glaze over and I feel like I'm just not having fun in the subject anymore when I'm reading it, but I probably should and would have a better perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I just go off of 1 mile at a time's point valuations because I found them to be reasonable with my habits for how I redeem points. And I just look at, Alaska miles are worth 1.8 cents according to that valuation. If I can buy them for lower than that, that's amazing. That never happens. But if I can get it for, around that and enjoy an Alaska trip on a flight somewhere, win-win. And then when I'm figuring out how much it would cost in points to take the flight versus cash, I try to just make it above 1.8. And you know what? Sometimes if I'm like, hey, I'm kind of short on cash because the client didn't pay their invoice this month, I'll just use points so it's not stressful, So it's more of like, it's a guideline just so you can at least understand if you're getting a good deal or not.
Yeah, fantastic. And so many times for the non-points EPS travelers, I've tried to find ways to convince people that it's actually worthwhile and you don't have to be in the US. It's easier in a lot of ways in the US, but you can buy miles. So Alaska Airlines is one where you can buy miles each year. They have various bonus offers that can make the numbers work. And so let's talk about that sister trip you took, Japan, Bhutan, how you're putting it together with miles going from Seattle.
Yeah. So I just watched the travel blogs. They frequently have like the Points Guy or 1 mile at a time or, rapid Chai travel. And there's frequently articles about the sweet spots that are in different award charts. And I noticed that there was a sweet spot using Alaska miles to fly to Delhi, India, because it's the same amount of points to fly all the way to India as just going to Japan. It's a sweet spot in their award chart. And Japan Airlines first class looked really nice as well. So and I started watching the inventory for the first class seats. To me, that's fun. I know it's weird and twisted. And I figured out, it's 330 days before the date I wanted to fly. They would release the inventory, meaning release the first class seat so I could buy it with points. And I figured out that they synced their databases at 6 a.m. Pacific every day. So it's 6:01 a.m. Pacific. I grabbed the 2 first class tickets that were available before anyone else could get them. And then, 21 days later, I did the same thing for the return trip. And fortunately, Alaska lets you do one-way awards. So that was like another bonus as well.
Fantastic. And Ethan, watching you pick how do you balance fun versus rational answer? I have a spreadsheet. I love it.
Well, I am a Microsoft top expert so I do like my spreadsheets.
Is a Microsoft top expert, is that the name of a certification, or is that a statement of confidence?
Well, Microsoft gives out what they call an MVP award, Most Valuable Professional. There's about 2,800 of us worldwide across all their technologies, and then 400 around the world for Office. So kind of they decide who their top people are. And I do have that award.
Yeah, fantastic. I remember in college as part of this, what was it called? Operations and Information Management class. They had us go through these side courses in Excel and Access. So I became a Microsoft Office user specialist, master level. It was very impressive for a college freshman or whatever to have this title. Although Access was my big weakness, I didn't do so well. I was very good at Word, and I think they even had like a publisher certification at the time. I didn't make it that far. Talk about that. Well, actually, I want to get to Ethan's question. We'll get back into the Microsoft and the tech part. But he's asking, how has the pandemic recession affected your points valuations? Do you find yourself willing to redeem points at lower valuations to avoid spending cash right now?
This is a hard one to answer because my job is in helping customers use Microsoft technologies to work virtually. So honestly, I've never been more busy in my life. And I actually am valuing maybe saving my points more than I would spend cash to get some of the low fares that are available right now. If I was traveling, I do have some things lined up for fall that are fully refundable just in case, but not optimistic. But I think as I can't see the Facebook people's names, but someone above or mentioned that it's more about having fun. It doesn't not getting the perfect valuation, but if you want to go on a trip and that's what your heart is telling you should do, and you can only do it if you use points, then that's what they're there for. Just use them. Who cares if it's not the perfect valuation,
Yeah, that's Karen, who has many points balances. It's a similar thing, and I feel like I just don't have motivation to use them and plan something that I don't think is going to happen, and I don't want to use them at some mundane thing. So I'm just sitting on my balances and maybe not earning with the same enthusiasm, but I'm also not gratuitously burning them.
Here's an example. So I'm scheduled to speak at a conference in Frankfurt at the end of October. Now, they might still have it because Europe has a pretty good handle on the pandemic, but I might not be able to travel. But because I bought it with points on Alaska during their refund window, I can cancel it up to like 2 days before the trip and get all my money back, including taxes and points and everything. So I've been trying to take advantage of that kind of loophole with the points as well to hedge my risk, if you will.
And Jeffrey Barney in Minneapolis is asking about the difficulty of manufactured spend and earning points in Seattle, which I certainly concur with that statement. And if you've exhausted the top credit card sign-up bonuses, how are you earning your travel rewards nowadays?
Well, I'm an independent consultant. I travel normally for conferences and for visit with clients. I put all of those business expenses on my credit cards, and I earn button seat miles from Alaska, and that's how I earn them, honestly. And then they pay me back for the expenses, and so it's kind of like manufactured spending, but with customer money, I guess. But yeah, you're right. Seattle would be bad for manufactured spending between traffic and there not being that many Walmarts and other things. It's not practical.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the geography. I mean, it's actually a corollary to the challenges of thinking about what are trips we can take that are very, very nearby within, say, 1 or 2 hours. And the same thing would be for manufactured spend of heading west is not really an option for earning points or using points. So you've got different islands with little B&Bs and that, and ferry access, which on weekends, that is, it sounds daunting when I hear people talk about waiting for ferries and that. So it'd have to be weekdays, and then going north.
Make a reservation for the ferry,
Okay. I need to learn some of that. But then it's like I guess it's no different than a flight. But then it feels like we've got to the time pressure. And I'm thinking going north, the border's closed, so that road runs out faster than I would like it to. Going east, you either go a little bit or you go a lot, because there's that huge gap once you cross the mountains, all the way then to, it's very sparsely populated and very flat farmland scenery for quite a ways.
You
Until it gets
haven't
really
spent much time in Eastern Washington, have you?
well. I mean, talk about those differences. So you go over the mountains. You're leaving from Seattle. You're over the mountains. Let's say it's not that much traffic. So
Yeah.
between an hour and an hour and a half, you've crossed over the mountains. And
So
then I know that, and I know Spokane, which is another 4 hours away. So.
Yeah. So I mean, for those that would like to visit Washington when there is or is not a pandemic, there's a lot of natural beauty. So we have this big mountain range that kind of outside of Seattle headed east. Of course, on this side of the mountain range, this being Seattle, there's tons of beautiful isolated hikes, cabins, Airbnbs, camping, backpacking, anything you can imagine. And then once kind of weekend trip distance from Seattle, a couple of my favorite are Lake Chelan, which is kind of wine country. So you can wine taste, go on the lake, get an Airbnb or a cabin. Leavenworth, which is a kind of fake Germanesque town. Wenatchee. And then there's even around Yakima, not in Yakima, but around it, there's a lot of it's kind of the other side of Mount Rainier, right? So there's a lot of camping and cabins and things as well. And then, of course, if you head down towards Portland, there's lots of options along the way as well.
Yeah, if you're heading south to Portland, that direction, you have a lot of Safeway country for Jeffrey Barney's question as well. That helps, and a few more Walmarts. But yeah, it's true that we haven't explored all that much. In the heading that north and south corridor, there are lots of, say, points hotels and the traditional chain hotels. Heading those east and west points, it does get more limited, and I find accommodation, especially, challenging to reach the price points we want. And I was actually looking about the Mount Hood area, so further south into Oregon, but it was the only thing in my price range for one. I think we were even looking at weekdays with a yurt in somebody's yard. I mean, and there just weren't that many. Setting aside places that were already booked, the whole total, there weren't all that many accommodation. I guess because it's so seasonal that it did seem a real challenge to figure out some of these little trips.
Yeah, I'm fortunate that my friends and I are planners. So for example, the cabin we stayed in last weekend, we reserved last December. So we just basically I always look October, November, December. I book something every other weekend. And then if I decide I don't want to do it, then I either give someone else the reservation and they pay me back, or a lot of them are okay with canceling in the busy season because they're going to find somebody else. So, I mean, yeah, it can be frustrating when you want to do something last minute, but, we are in a very urban area.
Yeah. And talk about that friend group you're traveling with and how you're making the social life work.
Yeah. So I live by myself, and then as do some of my friends. We're in that age range. And, the first 3 months of the quarantine were quite lonely. I mean, talking to people on video was not the same as seeing them face to face. And, especially being in the US, we think there's going to be a second wave in the fall. So we're trying to be better prepared. So we all share similar values and take social distancing very seriously. So when I say values, I mean, we wear masks all the time. We stay distant from people. We're not cavalier about it. And we're honest if we feel like we have a sore throat or something. So we basically decided we're only going to hang out with each other. And, it's like how you have 4 people in your family. We're just 4 family members that happen to sleep in different houses.
Okay. Oh, that's fantastic. And it's a great solution. I'm thinking that,
we call it our COVID cohort.
Your COVID cohort.
Yeah.
Do you have daily check-ins? You say your movements, or you're at a good trust point now?
No, I mean, we've all been friends for years, so I trust they're not lying to me. And if somebody was like, "Oh, hey, I really wanted to hang out with this person this week," then they realize they're not going to go to the dinners for 2 weeks, and that's fine. The dinners that we host in our houses, yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're rotating through the houses, and
yeah.
Oh,
Or like when we go to the cabins, like we go together and yeah, only with each other. So you can kind of pretend COVID doesn't exist for a second.
that's excellent. I like that idea, and it's very practical. CJ's talking about a road trip, so everybody's commenting how beautiful Eastern Washington is. So I'm put in my place, but it's as I said, to me it's either been the mountains, and then there's that last Walmart and Dairy Queen, and then there's like 3 hours to Spokane, where we in the past would visit friends quite often, and so that middle stretch I was referring to is.
So I don't think I ever told you
this.
this, but I grew up in Eastern Washington and Northern Idaho. So like just south of Coeur d'Alene in Spokane, there's Moscow Pullman. They're tiny college towns. And so growing up, we just camped every weekend. So I've been all over the area. And I don't know, I think it's pretty fascinating personally.
Spokane, Coeur d'Alene, I've been to. Those are beautiful. They're really gorgeous. And I was surprised that first time I went out that way, crossing over into Idaho, how many just these incredible lakes you start seeing popping up, and it's not what I had in my head is what I was going to see, and did very much enjoy that. I recently haven't I think what was it, May and June, I didn't watch any TV, but I did. I think back in April I flipped around and there was some very old, very bad. Early 80s Chuck Norris movie filmed in Spokane, and I watched a little bit of the beginning, and it was nice scenery to see and how much the city has beautified while retaining some of the features I was seeing from those shots in the 80s.
So I have to make sure the person that said they're in Missoula, have you tried a huckleberry yet? Have you tried like huckleberry ice cream or something? Because huckleberries are my crack and they're the best thing ever. So I don't want to make sure you don't miss it.
That's CJ Johnson, a familiar face from a lot of the Points events, Chicago seminars, and that. So, for those that haven't had access to a huckleberry and maybe only know the literary namesake, tell us about a huckleberry and how to enjoy them and where to enjoy them. Clearly, Missoula is one.
Yeah, so they only grow like up in the mountains, like on the Continental Divide, like we're in northern Idaho, Montana, or high mountain meadows like that. They're kind of like a blueberry. You can't domesticate them. You can only pick them wild. So they're sometimes called purple gold. And they're a bit more like tart than a blueberry. It's kind of hard to describe. There's nothing like it.
So he has not had the huckleberry.
Priority number one.
What are some for that part of the country? And I think it's one that because of relative remoteness that not as many American travelers may have visited that now suddenly are thinking, oh, are those the areas to go to over the coming year? So speak to the local food as well as the local sites as you head into Idaho and perhaps Montana as well.
Yeah. So if I was like, maybe flying to Spokane and renting a car from there, I would spend a day in Coeur d'Alene at the lake. If you like golfing, they have a very famous floating golf green. Then in just maybe an hour past that, there's a tiny town called Wallace, Idaho. And that's the gateway to what's called the Trail of the Hiawatha, where it's a mountain bike trail. Used to be a railroad that they've turned into a bike trail. So it's very gradual downhill. You can rent a bike there. You go to the bottom and there's a bus that takes you back to the top. But you go through like maybe 7 tunnels and 8 trestles. And one of the tunnels is like almost a mile long. So it's just gorgeous. So do that. And then, of course, if you can make it to Glacier National Park around Whitefish, and that's also a beautiful part of the country. And then just drive down western Montana on your way to Yellowstone. There's a really cool ghost town called Virginia City, where they kept like all the buildings intact, so you can kind of see what a gold mine town looked like. Food-wise, you're going to eat a lot of huckleberries and then a lot of steak in western Montana because grazing and cattle are one of the biggest exports. And yeah, I think that's it.
And there's what is the Garden of 1,000 Buddhas? Are you familiar with that in the area?
No, actually, I've never spent the night in Missoula. Uh,
Okay.
my parents are retired and they live in a town maybe 3 hours south of Missoula. So I always drive through it to get to my parents' house.
Hmm. This looks, let's see, near Arley, Montana. Wow, this looks incredible.
Wow.
It makes me think last summer I was visiting the remaining U.S. states that I had never visited and saw a very startling religious site in the panhandle of West Virginia. So I will leave that for people to hunt around. The Palace of Gold and this garden of 1,000 Buddhas makes me think a bit of that. So it's interesting to see these. Certainly, there's a lot of religiosity in the region. In addition to the beautiful scenery, I remember seeing all of the Ten Commandments billboards on the roadside and that. So it looks like are those various camps or like summer camps, Bible camps that.
Oh,
that
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna put the Garden of 1,000 Buddhas in my travel notebook, my OneNote notebook, where I keep all these cool tidbits that people tell you. I basically have a notebook on my computer. You could use Evernote or OneNote, and then I have a section for every continent, and then a page for every country, or in the case of the U.S., a page for every state. And then when people tell me these things, I just like write them down. So then when I'm going to go to that country, I already have a page of all the unique, cool things that people have mentioned in EPS or other places, and then can plan my route using that information rather than starting from scratch every time.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about that, all that travel organization as a Microsoft expert. So OneNote, I guess the competitors to that would be something like Evernote.
Yep.
And the pros and cons of that and other platforms?
I mean, I like it because it works, and Evernote and OneNote are pretty much the same. Don't tell anyone I said that, but it's just you can divide things into sections or categories, and you can access it easily on your phone or on a computer. So when someone mentions something to me in person, I can just be like, oh, hold on a second, I have to write that down, and I just quickly open up the page and write it down. And then on EPS, when somebody, mentions something cool that I want to see, I can just copy and paste the text and paste it in there, and even preserves the URL of where the information came from in case I want to try to reference it later.
Excellent. And that's a paid service? That's a free one? How does OneNote work for?
Yeah, it's free. Yeah, actually, most of the Microsoft apps are free now. And but only if you're using them from the browser. So not the desktop apps, which I don't actually use the desktop apps very much anymore myself. The browser ones are so good.
I guess I need to transition. I've never used the browser. I'm trying to think. Once for a client, they gave me Visio through the browser, but everything else I've done on desktop. I think I'm still on Office 2016 desktop and haven't changed or tried anything. So I didn't realize. So a lot of the browser based are free now. Okay. And so you listed TripIt and Pocket as well as tools. So Pocket I personally use for saving news articles. I haven't read, but I've never used it for any organization. I just save it and then delete when I do it. So is there more organization beyond just click and save, or how are you using it?
No, it's an easy bookmarking tool. So what I'll usually do is I just have a travel tag, and when I find a web page or an article that I want to reference, I have a button in my browser. I can just click. It saves the web page, and then once a month or so, I'll just browse through the travel tag and then transfer it to my OneNote if I didn't want to take the time to like copy and paste stuff, basically.
Okay, and that's another free service. And then TripIt. So we heard you like spreadsheets, and I feel like some of the ultra planners are either spreadsheet only or app style only. It sounds like you bridge both. So talk about your use of TripIt and when and where spreadsheets figure into your planning.
So I only use spreadsheets for budgets for trips.
Okay.
Beyond that, when I'm actually booking stuff, everything goes in TripIt. Mostly because well, in the past before Google Fi, it'd be a while before maybe I had internet, and I'd have to figure out how to get to my hotel, and it'd just already be available. But yeah, I find it super easy. You just click forward on all your reservations, and it does all its magic. And the other good thing is when I travel with someone like my sister, I just share the trip with her, and that way, if we ever got separated or something, she would know how to get home basically and where we're staying.
Wondering, is there a drafting place before TripIt? So in say this 3-week sister trip, you've got Japan, you've got Bhutan, you've got India. There's a lot of complicated flight options.
Oh, okay.
Which flights? What tools are you using at that stage before you get to popping in bookings into TripIt?
Okay, like to organize it or outline the trip.
Yeah.
Then I just use a spreadsheet, and I just do a simple thing where I put each day of the trip on one row, and then across the columns I have hotel, flight, other. And so I'm able to and I start out with hotel, just putting the name of the city I want to stay in. And then just getting more detailed from there until I actually make the booking.
Yeah, I find spreadsheets particularly useful for the different flight permutations, and as a way for me just to see, does it actually fit together, or did I just book two flights at the same time?
Yeah, and then like when someone, one of my coworkers was like, "Hey, I'd love to go on that same trip," I just give her the spreadsheet, and she can, take it from there. I don't have to be any more involved.
Fantastic. And Ezra, he's a young guy, as I know. He's asking your thoughts of Microsoft Excel, and I'm thinking of framing it in the sense that somebody in their teens, early 20s may never touch some of the Microsoft suite of stuff until perhaps a job or client lands. They might be in Google Docs entirely. So compare those.
I think it's more of a religious war than a fact-based war. Okay. They're pretty much the same. Once you start wanting to do some more advanced things, like collaborate with other people where you're editing the same spreadsheet at the same time, if everyone's standardized on Microsoft, it would be easier. But Microsoft didn't invest as much in education 5-10 years ago as Google did, and so now all the schools use Google. And Microsoft's getting a little more headway in that, so people will be more familiar with the tools. But yeah, it's more of a religious preference, I believe, than like this one's better.
Yeah, I've had recently some need to use some of the Google pieces, and I've slowly adapted. I think the one is trying to think exactly how to explain it, but when you right click and paste a column in Excel, it pushes the other column over, and in Google it just overwrites the column, and I continuously overwrite the column and need to stop myself and go back. So it's these little habits of many years that are hard to change. But I do find both tools useful. Teams, I made a very small effort for a client that used it for a bit, and I just gave up. I could not figure out what was happening, and what was a chat, what was a discussion, what were these cards. It's probably my failing. I've also had to use Slack for some clients and done better with that, because it seems to me clearly what Slack is for, and maybe it doesn't have. Teams to me feels like they've mashed up Trello and Asana and Project and a whole lot of things, and really at a fundamental level, it seemed hard to know where to interact, of what's like, I guess, is it a card versus a chat or discussion?
I'm like, yes. Teams has become a beast. And I think, if your company uses it and you're in there every day, it makes sense. But I pity the casual user that has to just drop in and start using it. But don't tell my boss.
Okay. But I saw announcements just a few days ago that Gmail is changing in massive ways. It sounds like for personal accounts, it may be months until some of the features roll, but it sounds like they're jamming a ton of features into Gmail, and that gets me nervous about usability too for people that have liked their email functioning as email and not Meet and all of these others, just loaded in there.
Yeah.
professional discretion.
I like the Facebook comment about Google Maps. That's another thing I'll do sometimes. Like before this all happened, I was planning a trip to Tunisia, and sorry, I just pronounced that wrong. Because I wanted to get a good sense of the drive times and whether or not they were reasonable. And so I used like a custom Google map to plot the route and kind of visualize it that way. So sometimes I'll do that as well, especially if it's within like one country or one geography rather than, Japan, India, Bhutan.
Which countries are you taking road trips?
Well, that one was going to be a road trip. And I was trying to decide whether I actually needed a driver. I could just drive myself alone. We'll see what it's like.
It's a wonderful. It's one of my favorites. And
yeah. And then I think I'm almost comfortable enough to drive on the left side of the road. That's been a big barrier in the past, like for Australia. But I think now I've spent enough time in those countries where it's instinctual when you turn, what lane you're supposed to end up in. So that'll be my next challenge.
I'm curious where the challenge for driving on the left is, because where it was a challenge for me ended up surprising me. So in terms of what road conditions or that have given you challenges?
Roundabouts. I think just instinctually knowing when I take a left turn to like not go to the right lane, just like not having to like think really hard about like every second of the drive. I was just kind of waiting for that comfort level. I don't really like driving anyway, so it took me a little longer.
Yeah, as I was thinking back to my first experience on the left was Australia, and I particularly arranged the trip so I would be in very quiet areas without much traffic. And it was the not having traffic as a guideline that actually, put my mind at sleep a bit. I remember driving through a national park and suddenly I'm on the right side of the road until somebody's coming. There was no cars anywhere, and then suddenly they're honking, and it was like, oh, look at the dummy with the baseball hat. Whereas places that have a lot of traffic, it feels like you can just flow through them. Jeff is asking, is seeing every country in the world a goal of yours? And how or why did you choose some of the hard to reach countries like North Korea?
Yeah, 100%. God willing, I will see every country in the world. It's pretty much my number one thing I want to do with my life. And, I have some friends that are almost at 193. And so when I ask them for advice and I look at what challenges they're having now, they left a lot of the really difficult countries till the end. And so now, it's just like a grind trying to get to them. And so I try to learn from that and balance out, difficult visas or difficult trips or, like when I went to North Korea in 2015, it was pretty okay. And I knew it probably wouldn't always be that way. So I was like, I'm going to go now while I have the opportunity. And then I also kind of, think about comfort a little bit. Like, I don't want to leave a bunch of like difficult from a comfort perspective countries to have to do all at the very end. I'd rather like sprinkle them throughout. Just personal preference.
And so you're analytical, you're a planner. We'll assume we're just time shifting. So whatever you planned in 2020, let's just be conservative and suggest that around 2022 you're able to do it. So you're at 52 right now. How are you thinking about fitting the next? I don't know actually exactly what list you're going for. You're going for the UN. You're going for your own list.
I'm just going to start with UN and see what happens. Definitely need to do another Africa trip. I think I'm going to try to make like every other trip an Africa trip at this point for a while. There's actually quite an active Microsoft community in many of the countries in Africa. And so what I would like to do is partner up with the local MVPs, the award that I have, to run little mini conferences for their communities. Because frankly, living in Seattle, I have a really great relationship with Microsoft corporate. And like, for example, one of my friends in Nigeria was trying to run an event forever, couldn't get the Microsoft local office to call him back. I was like, hey, Microsoft friend, can you just send this person an email? And he, a day later, had the office for his event. So again, it's like a privilege thing, but I want to like try to use my privilege to like help these other communities come together. Because once we've had an in-person event, it just sets the community on fire. Like people will get together more often to socialize or to learn from each other or do more one-off events. So I try to take that responsibility a bit seriously.
Expand on this. So how is this community forming together? Is it on Microsoft platforms like Teams that are organized, or these informal groups?
Well, like the Nigerians, I met because once a year, Microsoft has all the MVPs come together for an event in Redmond in the Microsoft corporate campus to learn from the product teams and whatnot. And so because they specialize in the same area as me, they were in the same breakout sessions. Okay. And immediately I was like, oh, you're from Nigeria. I'm trying to see every country. So we started talking about, of course, if you come visit us, you'll speak at an event. Okay, well, what kind of events are you doing? What are your challenges? Like, what are your blockers? And then, just try to see if we can help.
And talk about putting together the events. This is an interesting theme to me of being able to not just visit a country, but use your professional skills in this meaningful way. So you're finding these groups online, you're making introductions, and you're not just showing up at a bar and having drinks. So talk about that next bit of organization.
Yeah. Well, so, having this MVP award gives you a lot of credibility in the Microsoft community. And so even if I don't know someone, but I'm going to be traveling to that country, I'll just reach out and say, hey, I'm an Office 365 MVP from Seattle. I'm going to be, visiting Algeria in 2 months. Do we want to meet up? Yeah, sure. Let's meet up. Oh, okay, great. Is there a user group I could speak at or some kind of an event? Because if they already have something going, great, let's just plug into that. But a lot of people don't have something going. So I ask, would you want to organize something and can I help you? And then, once you run an event like that, then parts of your trip now become tax deductible as a marketing expense, depending on what your accountant agrees with.
Is there a lot of variety in the topics that are of interest in different countries that you're seeing? I mean, so broadly, it sounds like you're speaking on topics related to Office 365, but there's as many uses for that as the imagination allows. I'm just curious, what are people aspiring in markets, to say like in Algeria, Nigeria, to really know and implement?
Well, there's usually kind of two levels of users. So these small kind of meetups, it's usually the people where it's their job to be a consultant or be the person in their company who just does nothing but work with these technologies and implement them. And so in that case, we'll just talk about like what they're geeking out on lately, and let's do a session on that. Some of the larger conferences I've been to, like there's a South African one I go to every year, where you have more the everyday users showing up. Then it really varies from geography to geography. The biggest thing to keep in mind in Africa is bandwidth. Everyone has really, really low bandwidth. And so you can't just go in preaching the Microsoft gospel because you need a lot of bandwidth for that. So you have to come up and really think through these challenges of, well, you can't collaborate online in real time if no one has the bandwidth to get the real time updates, So like, what does that look like now without that?
Yeah, I guess thinking how slick these collaboration tools are, but it does chew up a lot of resource to just be editing in place. I'm curious of what are the employment opportunities and things that you're hearing about from these? It must be really. I felt on my trips in different parts of Africa how inspiring it is to encounter so many very young people that are so entrepreneurial and coming up with new business models, new things. I mean, some are competing for jobs that somebody sitting in Seattle might be competing for, and others are doing totally new stuff.
Yeah, and I don't have like a firm answer on this, but I think about it a lot. And first of all, it's getting people access to a laptop or a computer that they don't have to pay by the minute. So you have to have a certain amount of privilege to even be able to get to that level. But then once you do, you're right. You can be competing as a contractor with US resources. And as long as you're willing to work the time zone, people are caring less and less about where you actually sit. I think there's still some, frankly, racism stuff to overcome to make that a complete reality. I see a lot of people using American-sounding names to get the jobs as much as they can, because you're allowed to have a preferred name at work, right? And then you put your legal name at work, which I think's sad and not right, but it's the world we live in, and they want to be able to support their families. So, but I think more and more as number one, we get better bandwidth across Africa, which I know there's a lot of nonprofit organizations helping with that and with infrastructure. These jobs that are, much higher pay will be available to more people.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. I was just listening to a story about efforts to get a fiber optic cable into St. Helena Island, and what that could mean to totally change things. And
exactly.
I was there on my visit, and they were talking about getting up communications so they could be offshore call centers, because they speak a melange of languages there. And I mean, the local language and accent of, if you can call it English, is quite distinct. Very few people in the world can understand what on earth they're talking about. But then they in many cases can switch into multiple languages and be very clear on it. So it'll be coming. That's a place that when I was there a couple of years ago, they were just piloting a local debit card as a potential payment option. So, changing things. But then,
I think that's like a silver lining, if you will, of COVID, is like more people are getting used to working with remote workers. So it's not like going to be the barrier it was going forward. And instead of having to like move to the US and deal with visas and everything, you can bring the money back to the local economy when you earn it.
Speaking of remote workers, let's get your tips, because you've got a sunny background behind you, yet your face is wonderfully lit and clear connectivity. So you must be doing something very well.
Number one, okay, here's what I did, and then it's not what everyone should do, because I make training videos and sell them as part of my residual income strategy. So I invested in equipment, but I do have a light in front of my face, and it's a soft light, so it diffuses the LED light, so it's not like bright in my face. So that's how I'm able to do that. And I mean, I can even control it from my computer here. Like I'm going to go from blue light to yellow light, or make it like really bright. But and I have a good 4K camera. But if you are just getting started at home, lighting is the number one. You could have a really shitty camera. If you have good lighting, then that camera is going to be able to have enough to work with to make you look good. And it could be a table lamp with like a sheet or a scarf over it. You could do something on the cheap, or get what's called a softbox light on Amazon. It's a little bit more spendy, like maybe like $50. I went all in with the Elgato key light, which is ungodly expensive, but I really did need it for what I'm doing.
Okay. So there is something to pay for quality in this area.
Yeah, and plus, like, I live in a tiny apartment in Seattle downtown, so space is a premium, and a softbox light, it takes up a lot of room, whereas this is just very skinny and streamlined, and yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing these videos by happenstance, and of course I've got terrible lighting here. We're at a little hotel to change four walls around us about an hour away from our apartment in Seattle. So the light is really terrible in here. But even at home, I've been overwhelmed by. You've got these very expensive brands, or comparatively expensive, I should say. You mentioned Elgato is one I've seen, and then you've got everything on Amazon and eBay, which all look the same and all price about the same, and could all be junk or not. And I have no sense of how to sift through it. I ordered like a $5 portable little ring light that I was going to use for my laptop when I'm not sitting at my desk, and that made this the two settings. Then it had a strobe light function. I have no idea what that was for. That made
That's for your TikToks.
a loud clicking, and then the constant light function made this incredibly high pitched whine. And of course, the seller is like, "Oh, well, that's just how it's supposed to work." And I was like, "No."
Well,
no.
I think a good rule of thumb is if it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true.
Even in those, I mean, they were all priced about the same. I mean, it wasn't like I picked the cheapest one. They just everything looked about the same and about the same price. And yeah, it was just. And so I gave up for a while. So I'll need to. Maybe I'll have to go Elgato or
watch YouTube. So there's a lot of YouTube videos about how to stream on Twitch. Guess what? Streaming on Twitch is the same as doing this streaming. And there's lots of good advice on YouTube videos about, the cheapest possible kit that's good quality, or, here's how you should upgrade it over time. And I just did a bunch of research, and frankly, with all my lack of travel this year, I talked to my accountant, and we decided we needed to purchase some equipment. And so that's what I did.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I may have to use that as the excuse. I was mentioning accounting. I realized that, like, for small business, the accounting, the depreciation of equipment purchases was phased out in like 2017 or something. So it's a little different now. I was like, okay, how come none of this stuff I bought counts? And they said, well, it's counted a different way now. So,
yeah, it's not as good, but
yeah, I think that's good. And probably going with, but you mentioned these how-to videos. I do not like how-to videos. I only, if Google puts me results of videos, I look for anything but the video or the show notes. But I can't stand the first 2 minutes of the hi guys, and it goes on for 2 minutes, and then they start very slowly saying, this is
that's what the fast forward button is for.
I know. I put it at 2x, and I still can't.
Actually, Google started doing this thing I love, where if you search for something in the video search result, it'll just jump you to the part where they give you the information.
Oh, really? I didn't notice that. Oh, okay. So because I assume that's there's just like there's relationship building with the audience, but I assume mainly it's just to extend the play times and the ads or whatever to have so much fluff at the beginning.
Got it.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great tool. So what else productivity wise you've been dealing with both in-person events and virtual events for a long time. You've seen a lot of people that suddenly had to become virtual that weren't used to it in their work styles. What has worked and what hasn't for people?
I think the number one thing is like mental health and work-life balance. Just it's really easy to be working all the time. And I think especially now, like, people are understanding, if you need to, in the middle of the day, stop for some childcare or to go for a walk. And then make rules with yourself about what time to turn off your computer. Like, I have these candles in my house that are like battery, and they turn on every day at 7:30. And if I'm still working and the candles turn on, then it's time to close the computer.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so like, just find some way to like signal yourself to shut it down, and keep that routine. I think that's the biggest thing. And then just finding different ways to connect with people. Like Microsoft partnered with Harvard Business Review and released a study yesterday about work from home habits. And they found a lot of more one-on-one meetings are happening. like really short 15 to 20-minute meetings, but only between two people, which is really great and healthy, right? Because normally you would see them during the day at the water cooler or, whatever. So there's no reason not to maintain those relationships. And it's a lot less weird now to be like, oh, hey, do you want to have a coffee and just have it be a video chat? But yeah.
Interesting. In my applications, none of us are on the casual video chat way, but I did just a person I work with on a project, and just we normally work pretty closely together. The past 1 or 2 weeks, we've been focused on separate things. So he just appeared on WhatsApp today and said, "Hey, it's been a long time. Where are you?" And it's nothing pre this time that we would have had that kind of interaction, but it was that I just hadn't thought to say hi in our own way on WhatsApp in a week or two, and that got him a bit concerned, just looking for that connection.
Yeah, so on Monday mornings, I kind of think about like what my big goals for the week are, and one of my categories is who's someone I don't know really well that I should connect with. Like maybe they're kind of in the same work area as me, and we're sometimes on a meeting together, and they just seem interesting. I'll just be like, "Oh, hey," I come up with some good opening line that's not weird, and I'm like, "We should just chat for 15 minutes one time." Sure, when are you available? And that's actually been working out really well. It's actually led to a couple new contracts for me and business as well.
Let's say I want to really take a week off during this time. And it seems like, Europeans can always find a way, but as Americans, it's even harder to say I'm going to be away and I'm actually going to turn everything off. How do you, especially, say your work is similar to mine, different clients, different expectations, and just putting an out of office doesn't really seem to cut it, especially when people just think you have no excuse to really be away. So if you wanted to take a full week, you're just not going to respond to anything. How would you plan in advance? How would you handle it before, during, and after?
I'm pretty process driven, so I'll just make a list of the things I, would do in a normal week. I put someone's name next to it for who's going to do it while I'm gone. And then, of course, I try to make as little work for them as possible while I'm gone. I let my customers and clients know, hey, I'm going to be gone this week. Is there anything you can think of you're going to need? So I gave them full warning. And I tell them it's an unplugged vacation or it's a mental health week or whatever. And then I just do it. And it's really yourself. The minute that you start emailing during your vacation and you broke your own rule, people aren't going to take it seriously after that. It's kind of like if you don't have confidence in yourself, how are other people going to have confidence in you? Well, if you break your own email rule, why should they respect it?
Yeah, and for me, I've never imposed that because I've never minded working while I was traveling because I
try it sometime. Just unplug. It's great.
I've had a few where I really unplugged, but it's never been a big thing. I can compartmentalize and work for an hour or two and then not feel like I'm coming back to a giant pile of stuff to do. But then now this time I feel like I really want to totally unplug, and I've gotten more dependent than I've ever been on all this communication and the request that comes in that you don't respond to, that I'm dreading about, that maybe doesn't exist, but all that I haven't figured out how to really pull that off. So I guess it's a work in progress.
Well, I think that in American culture, we like to believe that, basically if things don't fall apart while we're gone, then that doesn't mean they really need you,
Yeah, exactly.
And, I guess like being in the tech industry, especially during the 2008 downturn and getting laid off like 3 times, I'm like, yeah, everyone's expendable, So, and work's not going to be there. You know how people say work's not going to be there to hold you at night. So it's true, right? So, what's going to be there? It's your life you've built for yourself. So work's only supposed to be there to support that life. And I've gotten caught up so many times in that, and it's never turned out great. So I just try to be really careful now. And honestly, telling myself no is the hardest, and maintaining my own boundaries is the hardest, and harder than anything anyone could ever ask of me.
Fantastic. And we'll close with Karen's comment, who says, I love that the younger generation like Erica is looking to share their education and work with others to improve their lives.
Thank you. Yeah. And just to kind of add some thoughts to that, I think it's trying to find the right way to do that. So you're not, basically the white person who's going to save Africa. You want to think about ways where they're taking the leadership role and you're supporting them, and you're being a good supporter and a good follower rather than, the good leader.
Fantastic. Thank you for that message, and thank you for joining us tonight, Erica.